These are the 5 airports where the most advanced autopilot systems on Earth are not allowed to land. A modern Boeing 787 can put itself on the ground in fog so thick the pilots can't see the wingtips. An Airbus A350 can fly an entire approach, flare, and roll out without a human touching the controls. And yet, at 5 specific airports around the world, regulators have written it into law. A computer is not permitted to land here. Only a specially certified human being can. To understand why, you have to understand what an autopilot actually needs to land a plane. It needs a continuous, mathematically clean signal telling it exactly where the runway is, usually broadcast by a system called the Instrument Landing System, ILS. It needs a flat, predictable approach path. It needs a runway that behaves like a runway is supposed to behave. And it needs the world around the airplane to stay obediently inside the assumptions written into its software. At these 5 airports, none of that is true. The first is Lukla in Nepal. Most people know it as the gateway to Everest. Pilots know it by its other name, the airport where autopilot has nothing to grab onto. Lukla sits at 9,300 feet on the side of a mountain. The runway is 1,500 feet long, which is roughly the length of 4 soccer fields placed end to end. It is also tilted, sloped at almost 12%, which is steeper than most ski hills. There is no instrument landing system at Lukla. There is no glide slope signal, no localizer beam, nothing for a computer to lock onto. The approach is flown visually, by eye, threading between mountain ridges, with a final turn that has to be initiated at exactly the right second, or the airplane runs out of valley. An autopilot cannot see a mountain. It cannot judge whether the cloud at the end of the runway is hiding a granite wall. Nepal's Civil Aviation Authority requires every Lukla landing to be hand-flown by a captain with a minimum of 100 takeoffs and landings into short mountainous airstrips. The computer stays off. The second is Paro in Bhutan. If Lukla is the most famous dangerous airport, Paro is the most exclusive. Fewer than 50 pilots in the entire world are certified to land there. Paro sits in a valley surrounded by Himalayan peaks rising to 18,000 feet on either side. To reach the runway, an aircraft has to descend through the valley itself, performing a series of banking turns between the mountains, with the final turn coming less than a mile from touchdown. The maneuver requires the aircraft to be banked at 45 degrees, just seconds before landing, a roll angle that exceeds what most auto-land systems are programmed to tolerate. Bhutan has banned autopilot landings at Paro outright. Daylight only, visual approach only, human hands on the yoke. The certification process for a Paro pilot takes years, and renewal requires recurrent training every 6 months. Princess Juliana International Airport in St. Martin, the airport on the famous Maho Beach, where jets roar in over sunbathers. People watch the videos and assume the danger is the beach. The danger is actually the runway behind it. Princess Juliana's runway is just over 7,000 feet long, which is short for a wide-body jet. The approach is over open water, which means there is no ground reference for the autopilot's radio altimeter until the very last second. The threshold is almost exactly at sea level, with a hill rising sharply at the far end. An autopilot programmed to flare at a certain altitude above the ground gets confused when the ground appears late and abruptly. Pilots flying into Princess Juliana are required to disconnect the autopilot well before touchdown and bring the aircraft in manually, eyeballing the threshold over the heads of the tourists below. The fourth is Courchevel Altiport, high in the French Alps. Courchevel is shorter than Lukla, just over 1,700 feet, and it has something Lukla doesn't, an 18.5% uphill gradient. The runway literally points up the side of a mountain. There is no go-around procedure at Courchevel. If you land long or land badly, there is no second attempt. The mountain ends. This is where autopilot logic completely breaks down. Every auto-land system on every commercial aircraft is built around the assumption of a flat runway. The flare command, the gentle nose-up that brings the wheels onto the asphalt, assumes the ground is roughly horizontal. At Courchevel, the ground is climbing toward the airplane at a rate the software has never been tested against. France's DGAC requires a special mountain certification, and pilots must demonstrate that they can land the aircraft uphill by hand in conditions ranging from blue sky to active snowfall. The fifth is Toncontin International Airport in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Toncontin is unique among the five because it has a paved runway, a control tower, and modern infrastructure. What it does not have is a normal approach. The runway sits in a bowl surrounded by hills, and the only way in requires a 45-degree bank turn at 600 feet above the ground, less than a mile from touchdown. Pilots call it the corkscrew approach. The bank angle, the altitude, and the proximity to terrain together exceed every parameter that an auto-land system is qualified to handle. The Honduran Civil Aviation Authority restricts Toncontin landings to pilots who have undergone a specific simulator program and who hold a current Toncontin endorsement on their license. Disconnecting the autopilot is mandatory before the corkscrew begins. What unites these five airports is not just geography. It is a category of problem that engineers have not yet solved. Autopilots are extraordinary at handling the predictable, the long runway, the gentle glide, the calm air, and the clean radio signal. They are still not good at the unpredictable. They cannot improvise. They cannot look out the window and decide that today, in this wind, with this cloud, the safest place to put the airplane is 200 feet to the left of where the math says it should go. Human pilots can. And at these five airports, that ability is not a luxury. It is the only thing standing between the aircraft and the mountain. The technology is improving every year. Boeing and Airbus are both working on auto-land systems that use computer vision instead of radio beams. Systems that can theoretically see a mountain the way a pilot does. One day, perhaps, a computer will be allowed to land at Lukla. That day is not today. For now, at these five airports, the rule is the same one it has always been. Hands on the yoke, eyes out the window, and trust the human.